Hey guys! Tonight, we step into a Saharan dawn where the air is cool, the sand still holding yesterday's warmth, and you are blinking awake beside a line of camels who look far more prepared than you are. You hear leather creak, wood knock softly against wood, and somewhere a trader clears his throat like he's about to start the slowest morning meeting in human history. You probably won't survive this, not because of danger, but because waking up before sunrise every single day in the desert would absolutely destroy your modern sleep schedule. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. Someone, somewhere, is also awake and pretending this is a reasonable hour. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly, because everything here is done slowly. The camp is quiet, not silent, but padded, like sound itself has learned to walk on tiptoe. This is the Mali Empire at the height of its gold trade, somewhere along the southern edge of the Sahara, and you are one very ordinary trader preparing for a very ordinary day that just happens to keep half the known world running on shiny metal. The first thing you notice is how little gold you can actually see. There are no glittering piles, no dramatic chests bursting open. Gold here begins as dust, fine reddish-yellow grains tucked into small leather pouches. The second thing you notice is the equipment. No towering scales, no engraved weights, just small balances, polished smooth from years of fingers adjusting them, and bundles of feathers wrapped carefully in cloth. Yes, feathers. You blink at them because your brain is still loading, and because this feels like the setup to a joke you don't yet understand. Around you, traders check ropes, retie knots, and count camels with the bored precision of people who have done this 1,000 times. Mainstream historians agree that Mali's wealth came largely from controlling gold fields in West Africa and taxing trade routes rather than hoarding treasure itself. That means mornings like this, checking loads of salt slabs, bags of cola nuts, and yes, gold dust, are the real engine of empire. No trumpets, just inventory. You stand, stretch, and immediately regret it. The desert air is cold enough to make you question your life choices. Someone nearby is rubbing oil into their skin, and you catch a faint, earthy smell. It's sunscreen of a sort, sometimes mixed with clay, sometimes with plant matter. Historians still argue whether certain mixtures, including some involving animal products, were actually effective or just comforting rituals that felt protective. Either way, you make a mental note that SPF 50 does not exist yet, and neither does complaining about it. As the sky lightens, you see the order beneath the calm. Each trader knows their role. Younger assistants sweep sand away from scale mats so nothing interferes with measurements. An older man checks the balance arms, tapping them gently to ensure they hang evenly. This is not fussy behavior, it's survival economics. A grain too much, a feather too light, and trust begins to fray. You kneel near one of the balances, close enough to see how small everything is. The scale pans are no larger than your palm. The feathers, often from birds common to the region, are trimmed and selected carefully. A quirky but well-documented tidbit is that feathers were valued not just for lightness, but for consistency. When dried properly, a specific feather type could be remarkably uniform, making it a practical everyday reference weight when metal standards were scarce or reserved for larger measures. A trader notices your curiosity and gives you a look that says gently, "Please don't breathe on the scale." You freeze. Even your exhale feels loud. This is the pace now. Slow enough that time stretches, but not so slow that nothing gets done. Someone begins a low chant, not musical, more rhythmic, used to keep focus while counting. Another trader responds with a murmured correction. It's collaborative, not confrontational. Deals here rely on reputation more than enforcement. Written contracts exist in the empire's cities, but out here, memory and honor do most of the work. Historians still argue whether this trust-based system was more efficient than later bureaucratic models, were simply better suited to small-scale, high-frequency trade like gold dust exchange. As the sun finally crests the horizon, light spills across the camp, turning the sand pale gold in a way that feels ironic, almost smug. You realize that the real wealth of Mali isn't flashy, it's procedural. It's mornings like this, repeated over generations, with scales that work and people who agree what a feather means. A camel snorts loudly, completely ruining the mood. Someone laughs. You relax. This is still life after all. Dusty, human, slightly ridiculous. You adjust your robe, sit back on your heels, and wait for the market to open, knowing that today's careful measurements will ripple outward to cities you'll never see, coins you'll never touch, and stories people far away will only half understand. You're still crouched near the balances when the first real trades of the morning begin, and now you understand why everyone moved so carefully earlier. This is the moment when feathers stop being strange props and become the quiet rulers of the market. A trader settles across from you, knees folded, movements economical, like he's conserving not just energy, but intention. Between you sits the scale, perfectly centered, as calm as a sleeping animal. Gold dust comes out first, not poured, never poured, but pinched. You watch fingers dip in a leather pouch and emerge with a whisper of yellow-brown grains. The dust slides into the scale pan with a sound you can barely hear, more suggestion than noise. Across the balance, a feather is placed, just one. The beam tilts, pauses, and everyone waits. You wait too, holding your breath again like that's helping. The scale settles, not level. The feather side is slightly higher. The trader adds a few more grains of gold, so few you wonder if this is all an elaborate prank on future historians. Another pause, another breath. Finally, the beam evens out, and a nod passes between both sides. This is agreement. This is math, but done with patience instead of numbers. The mainstream historical fact hiding inside this quiet moment is that gold dust was the primary medium of exchange in much of West Africa for centuries, especially for everyday transactions. Coins existed elsewhere, but here, dust allowed for flexible pricing, perfect for markets where a chicken, a book, or a length of cloth might all be valued differently depending on season and supply. Feathers made this possible at a human scale. You notice that not all feathers are the same. Some are longer, some shorter, some darker, but only certain ones are used on the scales. They're kept wrapped, protected from moisture and wind. A quirky but well-documented tidbit is that feathers were believed to gain sleep weight, becoming subtly heavier by morning. Whether that's scientifically accurate or not, traders avoid damp feathers like you avoid unanswered emails. Someone nearby gently scolds an apprentice for touching the feather with oily fingers. Oils add weight, however slight, and in a system this delicate, slight matters. Historians still argue whether such feather-based systems were standardized across the empire or varied town by town, with local traditions quietly adjusting what counted as fair. Listening to the murmured corrections around you, it feels like both might be true. You start to see patterns. Smaller purchases use single feathers. Larger ones stack multiple feathers, sometimes mixing types, always with discussion beforehand. There's no rushing, no one is flipping tables or yelling about prices. Bargaining exists, but it's soft, like two people rearranging furniture until it feels right. You catch yourself smiling how civilized this feels, then remember you're sitting in sand before breakfast. A light joke floats through the group when someone claims a feather is clearly in a bad mood today.
Another trader replies that maybe the gold dust skipped breakfast. 3 people chuckle. That's joke 1. Joke 2 comes when an apprentice sneezes and everyone freezes in horror, then laughs once nothing spills. Joke 3 is quieter, a muttered comment about how feathers never complain about taxes. Trust is doing heavy lifting here. There are no armed guards looming over each deal. Reputation moves faster than caravans. If you're known to shave dust or sneak heavier feathers into circulation, word spreads. Not loudly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Soon, no one wants to trade with you. In a market like this, social exile is more effective than punishment. You lean closer and notice markings scratched faintly on the wooden beam of the balance. They're not numbers, more like memory aids, lines and notches added over years.
By the time the last morning trades settle, you're on your feet again, because stillness has an endpoint out here, and it's called the caravan is leaving whether you're ready or not. The scales are wrapped, feathers tucked away like fragile thoughts, and now the real movement begins. You fall into step beside the camels, whose patience feels less like a personality trait and more like a survival strategy perfected over centuries. The road, if you can call it that, is a suggestion, a wide, pale path etched by repetition rather than intention. This is one branch of the Trans-Saharan Trade Network linking the gold fields of West Africa with salt mines to the north and markets far beyond. The mainstream historical fact is that these caravans could stretch for miles and take months to complete, carrying not just goods but news, habits, and ideas at a pace that made impatience pointless. You walk, a lot. The rhythm settles in. Step, sway, camel bell, breath. Someone begins a low song, not for entertainment, but for timing. It keeps everyone moving at the same pace, and more importantly, awake. You try humming along, immediately realize you're off key, and decide silence is safer. Joke 1 lands when someone tells you the camels are judging your rhythm. They probably are. Gold dust travels close to the body, often worn under clothing or tied securely to a belt. It's light, yes, but it represents days, sometimes weeks of careful trade. Salt, by contrast, is heavy and bulky, rectangular slabs strapped to camels like minimalist furniture. The exchange rate between salt and gold shifts constantly. Historians still argue whether these rates were driven more by scarcity, labor cost, or sheer inconvenience. But walking beside a camel loaded with salt, you suspect inconvenience played a starring role. The day stretches. Heat builds slowly like a polite threat. Cloth is adjusted, water rationed. You notice that breaks are frequent but brief. No one wants to stop long enough for muscles to stiffen or thoughts to wander too far. During one pause, a trader pulls out a small charm, just a carved shape, worn smooth. He taps it against his scale case before packing it again. Is it superstition, habit, comfort? Historians still debate how much ritual influenced trade practices, but out here, anything that steadies the mind feels practical. At night, the caravan folds inward. Camels kneel with exaggerated relief, loads loosened. Fires are small, careful, designed more for warmth than light. You sit close enough to feel heat, far enough to avoid sparks. Someone shares dried food. It's chewy, bland, and exactly what you need. Joke 2 surfaces when someone says this meal tastes like tomorrow's breakfast, but optimistic. Conversation drifts. Stories are traded as casually as goods. You hear about distant towns, strange customs, a ruler who supposedly weighed more gold than a horse. You suspect exaggeration, but no one corrects it. Stories don't need to be precise to be useful. They just need to be memorable. A fringe tidbit floats through the group about traders who could navigate by the feel of the sand underfoot, distinguishing regions by texture alone. Maybe true, maybe myth, but you start paying more attention to how the ground feels anyway. Sleep comes in fragments. You wake, doze, wake again. The stars are sharp and numerous, making your problems feel refreshingly small. You realize how much of trade depends on endurance rather than speed.
There's no express option here. Everything arrives when it arrives. That slowness is built into the system, protecting it from sudden shocks, wars, weather, bad moods. Morning returns quietly. There's no dramatic sunrise announcement. You simply notice that you can see your hands again. Packing happens in near silence, like everyone agreed yesterday was enough talking. As you walk, you think back to the feather-balanced scales and how strange it felt to trust something so light. But now, walking mile after mile with the same people, you understand that the real measurement tool is consistency. Same pace, same songs, same care, day after day. A camel stumbles slightly, recovers, and everyone pauses automatically. Loads are checked, straps tightened. Nothing is rushed. That's joke 3. Someone mutters that even mistakes take their time out here. By the time the horizon changes color and shape, hinting at a settlement ahead, you feel altered. Not energized, definitely not, but tuned. Your senses are quieter, sharper. You've learned to notice small imbalances before they become problems. Feather logic has followed you onto the road. As the caravan approaches its destination, you realize all those careful measurements back in the market weren't just about fairness in trade. They trained people to move through the world attentively, weighing actions, balancing effort, and respecting limits. You adjust your stride, match the pace again, and keep walking, because that's how this economy breathes, one measured step at a time. You arrive without ceremony, which seems to be the theme of everything that matters out here. The inner settlement announces itself not with walls or gates, but with order. Paths smooth out. Foot traffic becomes predictable. The camels sense it before you do and slow slightly, like they've entered a room where whispering is expected. This is Timbuktu, or a place very much like it during its quieter hours. Famous in distant retellings, but right now feeling more like a well-run library than a legend. The market is open but unhurried. Stalls are shaded with cloth and reed mats, arranged so that air can move freely. You notice that traders sit rather than stand, grounding themselves, reducing accidental movements. Gold dust reappears, feathers reemerge, and the scales are placed on low platforms so no one looms over anyone else. This physical equality is deliberate. Mainstream historians note that market regulations in Mali emphasized fairness, clear procedure, and calm negotiation. No public shouting, no aggressive haggling. The vibe is closer to a quiet study hall than a bazaar. You move through slowly, absorbing details. Books are stacked nearby. Yes, books, copied by hand, traded like any other valuable. A scholar pauses mid-conversation to watch a trade conclude, nodding slightly when the scale settles. Knowledge and commerce overlap here, not competing but coexisting. Historians still argue whether this closeness between scholarship and trade fueled Mali's stability or simply reflected it, but watching both unfold side by side makes the question feel almost academic. A trader measures gold dust for a bundle of cloth. The feathers used are slightly different from the ones you saw earlier, broader with trimmed edges. Local preference, you're told. A quirky tidbit circulates that some markets favored feathers from birds raised near rivers, believing they held steadier weight due to calmer lives. There's no proof, but no one laughs either. Belief doesn't need evidence to shape behavior. Rules are enforced softly. A man steps too close to a scale and is gently redirected with a hand gesture, not a reprimand. Another forgets to rewrap a feather and is reminded with a joke about feathers catching gossip if left exposed. Joke 1 lands easily. Laughter here never interrupts business, it lubricates it. You notice how disputes are handled. When a balance doesn't settle cleanly, both parties lean in, adjust together, sometimes even swapping feathers to test consistency. There's no audience for conflict. Privacy preserves dignity. The mainstream fact beneath this is that Mali's markets operated under Islamic legal principles blended with local customs, emphasizing mediation over punishment. Historians still debate how uniformly these principles were applied across regions, but here the system feels lived in rather than imposed. Midday heat arrives and activity slows. Some traders nap right where they sit,
hats pulled low. Others drift toward shaded courtyards where water is shared. You follow, grateful. The water tastes faintly metallic, maybe from the container, maybe from expectation. A fringe detail you overhear claims certain wells were preferred for trade days because their water kept the hand steady. Again, unprovable, but soothing. Conversations soften. Someone mentions a caravan arriving next week. Another one mentions a ruler passing through months ago, surrounded by so much gold that markets temporarily panicked. Historians agree this event occurred, but still argue about the scale of its impact versus later exaggeration. Here, it's just a cautionary tale about too much of a good thing. As the afternoon leans toward evening, deals wrap up, feathers disappear again, scales are wiped clean. You feel a strange affection for these tools, so small, so precise, so human. Joke 2 surfaces when someone pats their scale and says it's more reliable than their cousin. No one argues. You step back from the market, realizing how much of the day passed without urgency. Productivity happened anyway, maybe because of it. The calm wasn't decorative, it was functional. You think of modern markets, flashing numbers and alarms, and this feels like their opposite, a place where value settles instead of spikes. As the sun lowers, scholars resume debates, traders share meals, and the market dissolves into neighborhood. You sit, stretch your legs, and feel that familiar slowness return, the kind that seeps into your bones. The feathers have done their work, not just weighing gold, but teaching everyone, including you, how to move gently through importance without making noise.
Evening settles without announcement, like a careful hand lowering a lid. You're still near the market, but it has softened, edges blurred, voices lowered. This is when trust shows itself most clearly, when the scales are gone and only memory remains. You watch traders gather in small groups, recounting the day's exchanges, not to boast, but to confirm. Names are mentioned, quantities recalled. Everything aligns, or it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's noted quietly for tomorrow. You learn quickly that trust here is layered. There's personal reputation, built over years. There's family reputation, inherited whether you want it or not. And then there's market memory, the collective sense of who measures cleanly and who needs watching. Mainstream historians point out that in Mali, commercial trust often substituted for formal enforcement, especially in gold dust trade, where constant weighing made deception hard to hide for long. It's exhausting to be dishonest in a system that notices everything. You sit with an older trader who speaks slowly, not because he's tired, but because he's precise. He explains that feathers are chosen not just for white, but for familiarity. Everyone knows how they behave. Everyone knows how they age. A quirky tidbit surfaces when he mentions that some traders retire feathers ceremonially once they become too worn, thanking them for years of fairness. You're not sure if he's joking. He doesn't smile. Disputes, when they arise, are addressed the next morning, not at night. Night is for rest, not resentment. Historians still argue whether this delay reduced conflict or simply postponed it, but watching how people separate emotion from process, it feels intentional. Sleep protects judgment. You nod, pretending you've always done this. Food appears, simple, shared. Bowls are passed, hands dip, conversation ebbs and flows. Joke 1 floats by when someone says gold dust is easier to divide than dinner. Joke 2 follows when someone replies that at least gold doesn't burn if you forget it on the fire. Laughter fades into comfortable silence. You notice women moving confidently through these spaces, managing supplies, correcting accounts, directing younger helpers. Their presence is unremarked upon, which tells you everything. Mainstream scholarship acknowledges that women in Mali often controlled household wealth and local trade, even if caravans were male-dominated. Historians still debate how formal this power was, but informality doesn't mean insignificance. As darkness deepens, lamps are lit, small, steady flames. Someone checks tomorrow's feathers by lamplight, not weighing, just looking. Familiarity again. You realize that precision here isn't about obsession, it's about continuity. The same tools, the same methods, the same expectations, repeated until they become invisible. You lie back, watching sparks drift upward. Your body is tired in a clean way. No alarms, no urgency, just the quiet satisfaction of a system that works because people let it work. Somewhere, far away, gold will be minted, hoarded, fought over. Here, it rests as dust, having done its job. As sleep edges closer, you think about how strange it is that something as light as a feather could anchor an empire. Or maybe it's not strange at all. Maybe lightness is exactly what keeps things balanced. You wake to the sound of salt being shifted, a dry scrape that feels almost musical after so many quiet hours. Morning doesn't rush you. It never does. Instead, it stretches, letting people move from sleep to purpose without friction. Today, salt takes center stage, not the dramatic kind, just thick, pale slabs stacked neatly like minimalist sculptures. You run a hand along one, surprised by its coolness even in the growing heat. Salt is everywhere here, but never taken for granted. Mainstream historians agree that salt was as vital as gold in West African trade, sometimes valued weight for weight in distant markets. Out here, it's medicine, preservative, seasoning, and status symbol all at once. You watch as a slab is carefully broken into smaller pieces, not hacked, but coaxed apart with practiced taps. Each fragment is inspected like it might have feelings. Gold dust and salt meet again on the scales, though never directly. Gold stays in pouches, salt stays solid. The exchange happens through agreed equivalence, feathered scales confirming the dust, eyes confirming the slabs. A quirky tidbit surfaces when someone mentions that certain salt pieces are preferred because they sing when struck lightly. You hear it, a faint ring, and suddenly you understand why people get poetic about minerals. You follow a trader into a shaded storage area where everyday luxuries are kept. Cloth folded carefully, beads sorted by color and size, leather goods smelling faintly of smoke. None of this screams excess. Luxury here is about reliability. A good cloth that lasts years, beads that hold color, salt that doesn't crumble unexpectedly. Historians still argue whether Mali's prosperity raised general living standards broadly or concentrated comfort among traders, but watching how these goods circulate through ordinary hands, the line feels blurred. A woman oversees distribution, her instructions calm, unquestioned. She corrects a miscount with a raised eyebrow alone. Joke 1 lands when someone whispers that her eyebrow weighs more than a feather. Everyone nods solemnly. You notice that prices shift subtly depending on season and supply. After long caravan gaps, salt becomes precious. After successful harvests, cloth loosens its grip. The system breathes. No fixed price lists, no posted rates. Knowledge lives in people, not on walls. Historians still debate how formal this power was, but informality doesn't mean insignificance. As darkness deepens, lamps are lit. Small, steady flames. Someone checks tomorrow's feathers by lamplight, not weighing, just looking. Familiarity again. You realize that precision here isn't about obsession, it's about continuity. The same tools, the same methods, the same expectations, repeated until they become invisible. You lie back, watching sparks drift upward. Your body is tired in a clean way. No alarms, no urgency, just the quiet satisfaction of a system that works because people let it work. Somewhere, far away, gold will be minted, hoarded, fought over. Here, it rests as dust, having done its job. As sleep edges closer, you think about how strange it is that something as light as a feather could anchor an empire. Or maybe it's not strange at all. Maybe lightness is exactly what keeps things balanced. You wake to the sound of salt being shifted, a dry scrape that feels almost musical after so many quiet hours.
Morning doesn't rush you. It never does. Instead, it stretches, letting people move from sleep to purpose without friction. Today, salt takes center stage, not the dramatic kind, just thick, pale slabs stacked neatly like minimalist sculptures. You run a hand along one, surprised by its coolness even in the growing heat. Salt is everywhere here, but never taken for granted. Mainstream historians agree that salt was as vital as gold in West African trade, sometimes valued weight for weight in distant markets. Out here, it's medicine, preservative, seasoning, and status symbol all at once. You watch as a slab is carefully broken into smaller pieces, not hacked, but coaxed apart with practiced taps. Each fragment is inspected like it might have feelings. Gold dust and salt meet again on the scales, though never directly. Gold stays in pouches, salt stays solid. The exchange happens through agreed equivalence, feathered scales confirming the dust, eyes confirming the slabs. A quirky tidbit surfaces when someone mentions that certain salt pieces are preferred because they sing when struck lightly. You hear it, a faint ring, and suddenly you understand why people get poetic about minerals. You follow a trader into a shaded storage area where everyday luxuries are kept. Cloth folded carefully, beads sorted by color and size, leather goods smelling faintly of smoke. None of this screams excess. Luxury here is about reliability. A good cloth that lasts years, beads that hold color, salt that doesn't crumble unexpectedly. Historians still argue whether Mali's prosperity raised general living standards broadly or concentrated comfort among traders, but watching how these goods circulate through ordinary hands, the line feels blurred. A woman oversees distribution, her instructions calm, unquestioned. She corrects a miscount with a raised eyebrow alone. Joke 1 lands when someone whispers that her eyebrow weighs more than a feather. Everyone nods solemnly. You notice that prices shift subtly depending on season and supply. After long caravan gaps, salt becomes precious. After successful harvests, cloth loosens its grip. The system breathes. No fixed price lists, no posted rates. Knowledge lives in people, not on walls. Historians still debate how formal this power was, but informality doesn't mean insignificance. As darkness deepens, lamps are lit. Small, steady.
You begin to notice that the caravan stories, the ones that travel farthest, rarely mention the people who keep everything running when the camels are gone. Today, your attention settles there, in the quieter spaces behind the market rhythms, where gold dust doesn't travel at all. It stays home, and it's watched carefully. You step into a courtyard where families gather, shaded and calm. Children play with pebbles, arranging them into neat lines that look suspiciously like scales. Someone laughs softly and nudges them into a different pattern. This is where much of Mali's gold actually lives, not in motion, but in storage, memory, and decision-making. Mainstream historians note that women often controlled household wealth, including gold dust reserves, managing savings, dowries, and emergency funds while men traveled. Trade depended on this stability more than it ever admitted. You sit near a woman sorting small pouches, her movements steady, confident. She doesn't weigh the gold now, she knows it already. Her fingers recognize fullness the way a baker knows dough. A quirky tidbit surfaces when she explains that some families mix gold dust with tiny beads inside pouches, not to cheat, but to keep the dust from clumping in humidity. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or rare household ingenuity, but the pouch feels practical in your hand. Decisions happen here quietly. How much gold to release into the market, how much to hold back, which trader to trust this season. These choices ripple outward, shaping prices and availability, yet no one announces them. Power doesn't always speak loudly. Joke 1 appears when someone says the real scales are right here, tapping their temple. You notice how knowledge passes down. Younger girls watch, listen, are corrected gently. They learn which feathers correspond to which deals without ever touching a scale.
They learn which traders return fairly and which return smiling a little too much. This informal education is constant. Historians still debate how much of Mali's economic success came from formal institutions versus domestic transmission of expertise. But watching this unfold, the answer feels both and. Midday brings shared food again. Conversation turns to rumors from afar. Ships on distant coasts, strange coins stamped with faces, markets that never sleep. These ideas feel abstract here, almost impolite. Joke 2 lands when someone asks why anyone would trade dust for metal circles with faces on them. No one has a good answer. In the afternoon, you help repair a pouch, stitching leather with practiced hands guiding yours. It's slow work, deliberate, the same pace as weighing feathers. A fringe belief surfaces that rushed stitches leak luck. You slow down immediately. As evening approaches, you sense the balance again. Movement and stillness, travel and home. The caravan may carry gold across sand, but this is where its meaning is decided. You sit back, feeling the weight of something light, and let the courtyard settle into dusk. Night brings stories the way morning brings work, gradually, without pressure. You sit near a low fire as voices gather and drift, overlapping like thin cloth. This is when rumors stretch their legs. Not lies exactly, more like ideas trying on different outfits. Tonight's topic is the outside world, the places that hear about Mali without quite understanding it. Someone mentions travelers from the north, pale from sun avoidance, asking too many questions about gold. You picture them scribbling notes, eyes widening, missing the feathers entirely. Mainstream historians agree that much of what medieval Europe knew about Mali came second-hand, filtered through traders and pilgrims, often distorted by awe or confusion. Gold becomes legend faster than method ever does. You hear a story about a foreigner who assumed gold dust was weighed with metal weights and laughed when shown feathers. Joke 1 lands when someone says the foreigner laughed until he couldn't afford lunch. The laughter around the fire is soft, satisfied, not cruel, just amused by misunderstanding. Myths creep in easily here. Tales of cities paved with gold, of rulers who casually hand out wealth like dates. You know these stories will travel far, growing louder with each retelling. Historians still argue how much Mali's reputation was inflated by such accounts versus grounded in actual economic strength. Sitting here, you realize both can be true. Reality doesn't stop myth from improving it. A fringe tidbit surfaces about maps, how some distant map makers drew Mali larger than life, placing a golden king at its center, holding a nugget the size of a melon. No one here has seen such a map, but everyone likes the idea. Someone jokes, Joke 2, that maps were accurate. They'd include mosquitoes and paperwork. You watch sparks rise, imagining them as rumors themselves, bright, brief, drifting far before fading. The people here don't chase those sparks, they tend the fire instead. Trade continues tomorrow, regardless of what someone far away believes. As the night deepens, conversation slows. Someone hums, someone else counts quietly, habit more than need. You feel the familiar calm return. The world beyond the sand can misunderstand all it wants. Here, balance still settles. You lean back, eyes heavy, listening to stories soften into silence.
You sense the change before anyone names it, because change here never arrives loudly. It comes as a hesitation, a pause where a route once felt certain. You're walking again, but the songs are fewer, the caravans thinner. Nothing is broken, nothing is urgent, it's just different. The desert hasn't moved, but the world around it has begun to lean another way. Gold is still weighed with feathers, that hasn't stopped, but some of the destinations have shifted. Traders talk about coastal markets more often now, about ships that carry goods without needing wells or stars. Mainstream historians agree that from the late 15th century onward, Atlantic trade routes slowly redirected the flow of West African gold, weakening trans-Saharan networks without erasing them overnight. From where you stand, it doesn't feel like a fall, more like a long exhale. You sit beside a familiar scale, its wood darkened with age. The feathers are older now, softer at the edges. They still work. Someone jokes, joke one, that the feathers are retiring soon, and another replies that they'll outlive everyone. Laughter follows, but it's gentler, less certain. Markets continue, but volumes shrink. Salt slabs arrive less frequently. Some traders leave to try their luck elsewhere. Others stay, adjusting. Historians still argue whether this transition was experienced as decline by those living through it, or simply as adaptation to a wider world. Watching people fold routines inward rather than abandon them, you suspect adaptation is closer to the truth. A quirky tidbit surfaces when an older trader mentions that some scales were deliberately buried or passed down only within families as roots faded, kept just in case. You imagine future hands uncovering them, puzzled by feathers preserved like relics. The thought makes you oddly protective of these small tools. You walk through a quieter market and realize how much noise absence makes. Fewer voices, more space between stalls, but the rules still hold. No shouting, no rushing. Even change respects the pace. You help clean a scale, smoothing its beam one last time for the day. The act feels ceremonial, though no one calls it that. As evening settles, you sit by a fire that burns lower than it used to. Someone mentions tomorrow's caravan will be small. Someone else nods, unbothered. Joke 2 lands softly. Less walking for our feet, more walking for our memories. You feel that one. You think about how systems end, not with collapse, but with replacement. Feathers don't fail, they're just needed less often. The knowledge remains, waiting. You lie back, watching the sky, and feel the world gently turning away without slamming the door. You end the day where so many have ended before you, near a small fire, its edges neat, its heat modest. Evening has learned this place well. It doesn't rush in or demand attention. It simply arrives, settles, and waits with you. The caravan is quiet tonight, not from worry, but from familiarity. Everyone knows how this part goes. Someone feeds the fire carefully, adding just enough wood to keep it alive without making it loud. That balance again. You smile at how often it returns. Gold dust and feathers trained everyone here to think this way. Add a little, wait, observe, adjust. Mainstream historians often describe Mali's trade culture as sophisticated, but sitting here, it feels more accurate to call it patient. You hold a scale in your hands one last time. It's warm from the day, smooth from years of use. The feathers rest nearby, wrapped but not hidden. A quirky tidbit comes to mind when an older trader mentions that some scales were deliberately buried or passed down only within families as roots faded, kept just in case. You imagine future hands uncovering them, puzzled by feathers preserved like relics. The thought makes you oddly protective of these small tools. You walk through a quieter market and realize how much noise absence makes. Fewer voices, more space between stalls, but the rules still hold. No shouting, no rushing. Even change respects the pace. You help clean a scale, smoothing its beam one last time for the day. The act feels ceremonial, though no one calls it that. As evening settles, you sit by a fire that burns lower than it used to. Someone mentions tomorrow's caravan will be small. Someone else nods, unbothered. Joke 2 lands softly. Less walking for our feet, more walking for our memories. You feel that one. You think about how systems end, not with collapse, but with replacement.
Feathers don't fail, they're just needed less often. The knowledge remains, waiting. You lie back, watching the sky, and feel the world gently turning away without slamming the door. You end the day where so many have ended before you, near a small fire, its edges neat, its heat modest. Evening has learned this place well. It doesn't rush in or demand attention. It simply arrives, settles, and waits with you. The caravan is quiet tonight, not from worry, but from familiarity. Everyone knows how this part goes. Someone feeds the fire carefully, adding just enough wood to keep it alive without making it loud. That balance again. You smile at how often it returns. Gold dust and feathers trained everyone here to think this way. Add a little, wait, observe, adjust. Mainstream historians often describe Mali's trade culture as sophisticated, but sitting here, it feels more accurate to call it patient. You hold a scale in your hands one last time. It's warm from the day, smooth from years of use. The feathers rest nearby, wrapped but not hidden. A quirky tidbit comes to mind when an older trader mentions that some scales were deliberately buried or passed down only within families as roots faded, kept just in case. You imagine future hands uncovering them, puzzled by feathers preserved like relics. The thought makes you oddly protective of these small tools. You walk through a quieter market and realize how much noise absence makes. Fewer voices, more space between stalls, but the rules still hold. No shouting, no rushing. Even change respects the pace. You help clean a scale, smoothing its beam one last time for the day. The act feels ceremonial, though no one calls it that. As evening settles, you sit by a fire that burns lower than it used to. Someone mentions tomorrow's caravan will be small. Someone else nods, unbothered. Joke 2 lands softly. Less walking for our feet, more walking for our memories. You feel that one. You think about how systems end, not with collapse, but with replacement. Feathers don't fail, they're just needed less often. The knowledge remains, waiting. You lie back, watching the sky, and feel the world gently turning away without slamming the door. The night deepens, and your breathing finds a rhythm that matches the quiet around you. The fire is now more glow than flame, a steady warmth rather than a source of light. Sounds fade into layers, the faint shift of sand, a distant camel exhale, the soft brush of fabric as someone turns in their sleep. Everything important has already happened. You feel safe here, wrapped in repetition and care. Tomorrow will look much like today, and that thought is comforting. No surprises, no sharp edges, just the familiar patience of measured things. Your thoughts loosen, drifting like fine dust themselves, settling where they may without urgency. The stars blur slightly as your eyes close. Balance no longer needs your attention. The world can hold itself for a while. Sleep comes gently.